Greetings everyone, Bill Gibbons Crypto Hunt here with a new video. Now from December 28th last year through to January this year, my old friend David WOETZEL and his colleague Josiah Moore returned to Cameroon. They were joined by our Cameroonian colleague PIERRE SIMA. The team intended to explore the BOUMBA River and the Beck River in the hope of collecting new reports on the MOKELE-MBEMBE, otherwise known as the MOKELE-MBEMBE in southern Cameroon. They took an inflatable boat and an electric engine for silent propulsion along the river. Although David and Josiah made thorough and meticulous plans for a successful trip, things don't always tend to go as planned, especially in Africa, as they faced numerous delays of one kind or another. The video was filmed by Josiah Moore, who, in my opinion, did a first-rate job under very difficult circumstances. Now, after the video, I will give you my comments, including an update on another expedition that is currently underway in Cameroon. So let's roll the tape.
In November 2000, Dave WOETZEL, Bill Gibbons, and PIERRE SIMA traveled to the BOUMBA National Park in Cameroon to check into accounts of sauropod-type dinosaurs that missionaries in the region had heard about from the local Baka pygmies. The testimonies they heard from the eyewitnesses convinced them that these reports had merit, and since then many expeditions have returned to the region to search for the animal. Recently I was privileged to be a part of Dave's follow-up expedition. We covered a large stretch of the BOUMBA River and interviewed many Baka and Bantu fishermen and villagers along the river. This is the account of our expedition. As a quick overview for those unfamiliar with the search for living dinosaurs, accounts as early as the 1700s have trickled out of equatorial Africa of a large aquatic animal that resembles a sauropod dinosaur. These culminated in several expeditions into the Congo in the early and late 1900s. I would recommend videos by Bill Gibbons on his YouTube channel, Crypto Hunt, and Wayne Hall's excellent videos on his channel, Animal Discovery, for a more thorough overview of the research that has been conducted over the last century. When civil war broke out in the Congo, Bill Gibbons decided to look into accounts from Cameroon as a safer place to conduct research. This expedition started off with sickness for me. I was plagued by a cough and lack of appetite for the first few days in the country. While the cough never truly left until I got home, I was about recovered by the time we reached the river. By my count, we lost about a week to delays. Our plane was delayed due to a mechanical issue in the Central African Republic, and we spent the night in a small airport lobby. This was harder on Dave than me, as I was so sick I lay down on the concrete floor and slept. Dave was led to believe over the phone that the airport would work with his overweight luggage, but at the airport he was informed that whatever he had been told on the phone had been false, and that he would have to leave his raft behind. His electric motor battery was also stuck in the port city of Douala, so we spent 2 days driving to and from Douala to pick up his battery and obtain a raft. Finding the raft was not easy. Cyprian, a local Christian, spent 2 days before we arrived scouring the city and had only found 2 options. The first was way overpriced, and when we examined it, we discovered that all the adhesive had dry rotted, and the raft was falling to pieces. Cyprian told us that the other raft he had seen was under a pile of junk by the waterfront, and looked in terrible shape. We found it in much better condition than we had expected, and were able to rent it the next day, after the owner made some repairs. Obtaining this raft, when we were losing hope of finding one, was one of the many ways God provided for us on this trip. After obtaining the raft, we lost no time in booking it back to Yaoundé, and from there we took a late-night drive all the way to Bertoua, the capital of the region encompassing the BOUMBA National Park. It was from here that we embarked on a short flight to get an aerial view of the BOUMBA River. Tom Needham, a missionary pilot in the region, graciously offered to fly us over the river before we headed into the bush, and this proved extremely helpful in locating rapids and waterfalls that might prove dangerous. The flight was breathtaking, over lush areas of rainforest. While most of the rainforest seemed vast and untouched, there were also many areas that were riddled with logging roads, and that was unfortunate to see. Certain trees stood out with blossoms and were especially beautiful. Sadly, I did not obtain any footage of these. After the fun of the flight, we faced further delays. We lost 2 days waiting on the governor's letter, and another half-day waiting on a truck that, as it turned out, had multiple mechanical issues. On the trip to the river, the alternator went out, and we had to push start it 3 times along the dusty dirt roads, and finally drove into Yakaduma in the dark, with only the faintest dim orbs of headlights. The next day, a Chinese man and his driver had pity on us, and took the battery out of their truck, holding it over ours. They connected the terminals with steel tools and jump-started us. We finally did reach the river to my great relief, and were able to get our raft pumped up and out into the current without incident.
Row, 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 row. Back pedal a little, Josiah. Row, Pierre, row. Row, 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 row. A little more, Josiah. Row. Back paddle, Pierre. Row. That was a narrow stretch there. That thing gave us some zap.
Goodness.
You pay for that at Disney World.
The first 2 days, we encountered a lot of small rapids. These slowed us down and resulted in a lot of extra water entering the raft, but weren't very dangerous. About the second or third day, we got stuck on a log and water started to flood in over the upstream side of the raft. Luckily, we managed to get free from the log before we could swamp. Another exhilarating moment was when we took the most direct route through some rapids and found our raft stuck over the edge of a small waterfall. Thankfully, we were able to push ourselves over and landed upright without mishap. After the first couple days, the number of rapids greatly subsided. From our flyover, we knew there was a set of rapids with a waterfall that would likely be impassable. Dave had marked it on his Garmin, but due to a series of unfortunate events, the Garmin broke about the third or fourth day. No longer knowing exactly where we were on the river, we reverted to asking the fishermen about the nearest landmarks.
Well, we're past the hump. We're on day 5. Day 8, we need to head out. But we still got a couple real promising days deep in the park today. Hopefully we have some reports of more recent sightings. We have to keep asking people how close we are to the Angola, to the falls.
We finally did reach the waterfall. It was not a sheer drop, but it was steep and turbulent enough to be dangerous, and the locals told us that several people had died attempting to traverse it. Frankly, we never saw all of it. Dave hiked to the bottom of the first half, and after being told there was a second section, he decided to wait on more of the villagemen to show up. God again provided here, as there were enough men near the village to help us carry the raft and the motor the 1-kilometer hike around the falls. The hike around the falls was partially through a cocoa plantation, where the cocoa is still grown under the rainforest. With the help of our porters, we reached the river in good time. They helped us reinflate the raft, and we set off.
It's Mokele Hotel, and we are awful thankful that I found a place for the night. We're only got another hour of daylight, got hammocks to set up, fire to make, dinner to cook, and then maybe a little bit of twilight to watch for monsters.
Our first and last nights on the river were by far the hardest. The first night we stopped rather late, and with the rising humidity in the evening the leaves simply would not light. Finally, after many attempts, we thought to pour some of our cooking oil over the leaves and sticks, and thankfully that proved to be successful. Afterwards, we stopped earlier, and our fires started much more easily. We also learned to look for abandoned baka pirogues along the river, which often signified a good camping site.
We're going to be camped up amongst the roots of this big old gnarly tree. We'll have to work our way into the jungle here. There's a pirogue at the river, so a pygmy has probably found this spot already. It's actually a pretty good spot. It's a really good spot for a hammock here. It took us a while to find it. It's a bit later than we'd like, almost 5 o'clock, so it'll be getting dark soon.
The last night, Pierre and Dave returned after dark from their excursion to Akumala to obtain cell reception, and we set out across to the other side of the river where we had been told there was a favorable campsite. We could not find it. All the banks were muddy, and at one point I sank up to my waist in mud and water after stepping off the raft next to a bank. We then decided to go back upstream, but the ferry crossing was so shallow in most places we couldn't use the motor, and it took many attempts to find a passable route in the dark. Our campsite at the confluence of the BOUMBA and Beck rivers was muddy, but better than all the other banks I had jumped out on that night, and the stream was nice and rocky and firm. The other challenge of camping was the cold. About 9 p.m. every night I would wake up cold and climb into my sleeping bag. The first night everything had gotten so wet between the rapids and the leaking raft that I just assumed my sleeping bag was wet, and so put on my pair of wool socks and curled up into a ball to stay warm. Dave thought to check his when he woke up cold, and found it reasonably dry. After the first night I discovered mine also stayed remarkably dry, and the areas that weren't I dried over the fire. Pierre had it the worst, as his blanket didn't shed water like the bags did, and it never fully dried. We gave our sweaters to him to dry over the fire every night to help him stay warm. On the whole, though, the camping was very pleasant. Every campsite was unique, and the hammocks were easy to set up and great to sleep in. Our meals consisted of dried meat and rice, which we cooked over an open fire in an aluminum pot we had picked up in Bertua. One night we even stayed with the baka, and they were impressed with everything, our hammocks, our raft, and quite amusingly, my hair. Our time on the river was glorious. We typically got on the river around 7:30 and found a campsite around 4:30 to 5 p.m. Our power was supplied by an electric trolling motor, but I will let Dave tell you about that.
I'm kind of cramped up holding the solar panel constantly, same position. But it's letting us keep the battery levels up at the same level even after driving. Pierre's keeping the water levels down, I'm keeping the battery levels up, and Josiah's keeping the camera on the ready.
The people, they say, they never say, and we are passing like that, we don't stop. They wanted to see this type of people. they never see it.
We talked with everyone we met, and unfortunately the story was always the same. The people's parents had told them about the MOKELE-MBEMBE. It was a dangerous animal, but they had never seen it, and didn't think it lived on their section of the river. It liked broad, deep pools, and perhaps we would find it downstream. I've included our interview here with an older Baka man, who I consider the most knowledgeable of those we spoke with.
Uh-huh. What did he say? They say in the past it was not possible to work like this. Many years they didn't see MOKELE-MBEMBE here again. Maybe is another side of the in the past to work with people like this it was not easy here.
Why?
Because of MOKELE-MBEMBE.
Oh, he would come and crash you through it?
Yes. Est-ce que ça m'a dit le poisson de MOKELE-MBEMBE là?
Oui. Tu pouvais même parfois même les vrais poissons gros comme ça, bien coupés. Ils prennent seulement vers la queue, ils laissent la tête.
Through here because they're common in MOKELE-MBEMBE. They would come and crash into the pirogue.
Auparavant, mais maintenant il n'y a plus.
They said that it's been some years now since they've seen them in this part of the river.
And he said in the past, even when sometimes they were coming on the border, they can see a big fish because it's killing by MOKELE-MBEMBE. Because it eat fish and many things. As well.
So he's saying it was an omnivore and it would eat fish as well as leaves and fruit that we've heard about before. Has he seen the MOKELE-MBEMBE?
No.
Not himself?
No. He said,
Many years.
he said they were coming here and they only meet fish, big fish. And we were able to see the leaves, a lot of leaves. One part of it eating by MOKELE-MBEMBE.
As we have seen in the video, he told us that it ate fish in addition to plants. This would be the first report that these animals ate fish, so perhaps his second-hand knowledge was inaccurate. Nevertheless, it is quite interesting. When Dave and Bill first went to Cameroon, people were unaware of the interest Westerners would have in the MOKELE-MBEMBE. But since then, the BBC and other groups have come in and made shows about the animal, and many expeditions have come looking. The chance for false reports has certainly increased. For example, when we put into the river the Congo River crossing, the people told us that a MOKELE-MBEMBE had come past that section of the river just the week before. But the first fisherman we met told us that the animal was not present in that stretch of river. Considering the consistency of the testimonies, we doubt we were being told the truth at the river crossing. We passed by a deep pool where some Baka fishermen told us that 3 years prior, a group of 3 white men had come with 20 Baka guides and many pirogues to that pool, and stayed 2 weeks, because they had heard a rumor that a MOKELE-MBEMBE had been seen in that pool. Likewise, at a village, some Baka women told us that 3 years prior, a man from their village had been hired by an expedition to look for the animal, but had found nothing. They also said that they had other people come to their village and ask about the MOKELE-MBEMBE. While on the river, we saw an otter and a vast variety of birds and several species of monkey. This was greatly in part to our electric motor, which allowed us to move quietly along the river without scaring the wildlife. I spent a lot of time trying to get pictures and videos of all the different species, although some managed to elude me the entire trip. One remarkable sight were the giant spider webs. These were built into the snags of trees or on top of rocks along the river. These reminded us of the scenes from Lord of the Rings, but Pierre assured us that the spiders responsible for making the webs were not themselves giant. We never saw the spiders. Pierre said he had once went searching for the giant spiders reported in the rainforest, but unfortunately had been unable to find them. Butterflies are by far the most common animal on the river. They especially liked the dirt banks along villages and the rocky islands and sandbars along the river. These numbered in the billions like nothing I'd ever seen before. The monkeys were always deeply offended at our ability to quietly sneak up on them, and would jump to the branches screaming whenever we came into sight. The birds weren't much happier, most especially the black ibis, which had a loud and piercing cry. The hornbills were also very noisy, but were very entertaining to watch. They had a very distinctive sound when they flew, and made a great ruckus in the evenings when they were feeding or settling in to roost. We faced one major challenge in recording wildlife, and that was that the first day all my photography equipment was soaked, and the second day Dave's video camera was soaked. We spent 3 days with only the 2 small action cameras working before our equipment finally dried out and thankfully began functioning again. The 2 casualties were my game camera and my headlamp, which were both completely ruined. We had hoped to explore the tributaries of the MOKELE-MBEMBE rivers, but the wet season in 2024, we were told, had been unusually dry. More than simply an unusually dry wet season, but during the dry season the water levels have dropped enough that these tributaries simply aren't passable in a raft. Baka we talked with also indicated that they had not seen the animal in the beck. Nevertheless, we left trail cameras where these rivers entered the BOUMBA, as these were some of the few places we thought we could relocate when it came time to retrieve the cameras. I attempted to hike up the Beck River, but quickly ran into areas too deep to wade, and was forced to diverge into the scrub along the bank before finally deciding to turn around. I did find a footprint, which Pierre told me was produced by an antelope. He tried to explain how an antelope made such a print, indicating it had been digging for something. When I first found it, I thought it was that of a crocodile. I've included a bit of my hike up the beck so you can see it for yourself.
Well, I think it's too deep.
Yeah, it gets kind of narrow up there.
As an anecdote, some young men near the Beck ferry crossing told us that a MOKELE-MBEMBE had washed ashore near Malundu just a few years ago. As it turned out, after further questioning, it was not a MOKELE-MBEMBE, but a python. They mistakenly thought the snakes were dinosaurs, and not knowing much about MOKELE-MBEMBE, thought perhaps they, pythons, and dinosaurs were the same thing. I believe the fishermen along the river knew what we were speaking of, or we would have received lots of misleading reports like this one, as rock pythons do live in the region. As a point of interest to the giant snake researchers, they claimed the snake was 12 meters in length, which would put it at a whopping 39 feet, longer than current living snake species. But considering their obvious second-hand knowledge, I would take it with a grain of salt.
The brimble left.
As I have already explained, we had many challenges getting to the river due to the unreliability of the truck, and this was the case getting back out of the bush as well. We spent a whole day waiting for it to arrive, and it took almost an hour the next morning before our driver got it to start. The road out of the bush was a tiny dirt track, which we jokingly referred to as Cameroon's Autobahn.
Cameroon Autobahn 301.
You go as fast as you can. You go crazy. No speed limit.
Hardly a dirt path in many places, we bumped over potholes and ruts and dodged around fallen trees. Each moment I expected the engine to sputter out and leave us stranded in a gully. We did end up having to abandon it just a few hours into the drive because the transmission went out. Thankfully, it died near a village and not on that jungle path. Amazingly, in just over an hour God again provided for us in sending a friendly gendarme who was headed to Yakaduma with his wife and friend, and we were able to hire a ride with them. This was fortunate, as trucks were very rare on these roads, and most I saw were full of people and possessions, and they weren't stopping to pick people up. The trip back to Yakaduma with the gendarme was quite the adventure, but that's a story for another time. Overall, the rest of the trip home went much more smoothly, and I was glad when I finally made it to the airport and was able to board my plane home. I've used the term MOKELE-MBEMBE throughout this film. However, in this region they call it LIKILA-BEMBE. Pierre told us that the meaning of this is best translated as foot like a lizard, slippery skin. Dave and I found the description of the skin interesting and asked Pierre about it, but he didn't know what it was about the skin that made the pygmies describe it as slippery. While we did not find the animal, we accomplished a great deal. We covered almost 100 miles of river from the ferry crossing near the little town of Congo to the Beck ferry crossing near Akumala. 3 more days and we could have reached the ferry crossing at Malundu, 40 more miles downstream. Unfortunately, due to all the delays, we simply ran out of time. It was a bit discouraging not even finding eyewitnesses on this trip. 25 years prior, Dave interviewed quite a few people who had personally seen the MOKELE-MBEMBE on the BOUMBA or its tributaries, but it would appear that the population is declining or the animal has left the BOUMBA River. He suggests to future researchers that the jaw and the ngoku be given more careful examination. The lower reaches of the BOUMBA below the back are also a possibility. I personally hope to return and float the jaw if eyewitnesses can be found. Pierre hopes to conduct some interviews along the ngoku forest at some point in the future, so hopefully he turns something up. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment or a like below. If you know missionaries in Equatorial Africa that are aware of such animals, I would love to hear about it. I also want to mention that I plan on releasing a short interview with Pierre at some point in the future, so stay tuned.
Well, there it is. Their inflatable boat did not arrive, necessitating 2 trips by road from Yaoundé to Douala to find a replacement. By the way, that drive is 148 miles one way. Their electric engine arrived late, and some documentation that was required to allow the expedition to proceed was also late in coming. In Africa, bureaucracy moves at its own pace. Well, these and other delays cost the expedition valuable days before they could get underway. The BOUMBA was very low for the time of year. In November 2000, Dave WOETZEL and I found the BOUMBA to be deep and easy to navigate, with no rocks or rapids getting in the way. The BOUMBA River is 390 miles long, with many small branches leading off into the forest. And as we can see here, the smaller Beck River cuts deep into the forest, making it an ideal hiding place for any large, elusive animal. Flying over the area was a very good idea, and I hope that this is something we can do in the future. The reports that the LIKILA-BEMBEs had moved on is not surprising. The animals rarely remain in one place for longer than 1 or 2 seasons, and the most recent reports of the MOKELE-MBEMBE and other strange animals have emanated from the upper Jar River, where it is very remote and tranquil. Here are a few photos of strange footprints left on the banks of the upper Jar River. In 2012, John Kirk and I were told by a village chief and his wife that they observed a MOKELE-MBEMBE in the Jar River, trying to catch fish. Although we doubted this at the time, the recent report given to Dave concerning a MOKELE-MBEMBE attempting to eat fish in the BOUMBA River strongly suggests that these animals are at times omnivorous rather than purely herbivorous. Now, this is interesting, as hippos are mainly herbivorous, but have been observed eating meat, including the remains of other hippos. While the digestive system of the hippo is optimized for plant matter, eating meat may be driven by a need for nutrients lacking in their regular diet, particularly when their plant food might be scarce. The mention of a giant python said to be 12 meters or 39 feet in length was intriguing, as we have received reports from time to time about outsized pythons in this area. Nevertheless, the importance of interviewing first-hand eyewitnesses who have observed MOKELE-MBEMBEs for themselves is crucial for accuracy. The name MOKELE-MBEMBE, loosely meaning lizard foot with slippery skin, is also very intriguing. I hope to look into this more if and when I return to Cameroon. And now for the latest news. My French colleague Michel Bellot is currently in Cameroon. He left on May 15th and will return in 3 weeks from now. He will be traveling south on the BOUMBA and the Bec rivers to check out the game cameras left there by Dave WOETZEL. He will then proceed north on the Jar River to check out the game cameras he left on an earlier trip last December. Well, let's hope that those cameras have recorded something amazing that I can report back to you in a few weeks from now. As for myself, I hope to be joining another OGOPOGO search in September this year with local researcher Bill Stasek. On this trip, we will be deploying drones, hydrophone equipment, an ROV, and night vision equipment. Well, that wraps it up for now. The next presentation will focus on the results of Michel Bellot's expedition when he returns in a couple of weeks. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you then.